And I'll just open up with a very open question. When you saw the topic, crazy business, what went through your mind? So this is really open-ended, and anybody can respond. What went through your mind when you got the invite and the topic, crazy business? What's your attitude towards the just hearing the word business? And when you add crazy, what do you think? What went through your mind? All right, Shane Joseph, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good evening. So when I heard the word crazy business, it was a lot of chaos. So there was a lot of chaos because crazy in itself is one chaotic word. Then busyness is like, oh, that was a lot. So I'm like, oh, I guess it does describes the situation we find ourselves every day. There's so many things that are asking for attention. It could be work. It could be just even ministry activities sometimes, all those things all together, they just seem to demand our time. So that's what came to mind.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a great response to kick off. Any other thoughts? Anyone else wants to share what crossed your mind when you received the invite? Business. I love intuitive responses. They're very genuine, very authentic, and that's what Sheryl just did. Do we have more of those?
Yeah, if I can,
Yes,
to be honest, the first thing that I thought was is this business in terms of activity or business in terms of transaction? I know at this I kind of have a bit of background on it, but just absorbing it, I'm like, okay, is this thinking about when you're busy in terms of work? You're trying to make ends meet, you're having business transaction, like money, or is it business in just the things you do? You are engaged with so many activity, not necessarily because of work, but not being able to prioritize timing and all. So those are my initial thoughts, and I'm hoping that this would also speak to some of those perspectives.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Thank you so much. Uncle Ludu's hand is on.
Yes, when I saw it, I smiled, and I remembered some of the discussions you've had with Dr. Diane while I was there. So I thought, oh, what an interesting oxymoron, this would be an interesting topic because crazy and busy. Okay. That's what I thought. So I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Thank you for that. And I think it's really good to get your contribution and even Rotimi's. Clearly, Rotimi, from your comment, there is busy with I and there's busy with Y, right? So I think we emphasize the one with Y, which is really busy, and then the next follows. So, but I'm glad you asked about that. And so that actually leads to one of the first questions here will be, how would you define busyness with the Y in the context of our modern times? What are some common signs that someone might be experiencing? You see, business can have positive aspects and can have negative aspects, right? So, Dr. Diane, I would like to show this to you. In the context of modern times, can you speak to the word busy?
Yeah. So one of the reasons we came up with this topic is just something that I've been experiencing personally and wondering about busyness. And if it's the question I was asking myself is busyness sin? And I realized I first had to say, well, what is busyness? Yeah, there's lots of fun things that we do. You have a fun-filled weekend. And that can be everything from family events to church-related to events to going to a sports class. I mean, that just doesn't really seem like sin. And so for me, it was going back and defining busyness as, is it something that I determine, or is it something that I let other people determine for me?
Wow.
The second thing I realized, so A, who's determining what I do in my schedule? And the second thing I had to ask myself is, why am I busy? Because I realized that in the past, and I haven't had a full-time job for a little over 3 years now. And so it's given me a very different perspective because one of the sisters here helped me see that I was like, my schedule, I was just like, my calendar had to be full. I had to be doing everything. I was on LinkedIn. I was trying to network. I was applying for jobs. And she goes, why? And I was like, what? She goes, why are you doing all that? I'm like, well, I need to get a job. I need to. And she's like, okay, but have you put your day before God? And that just completely threw me for a loop. And realizing that there's a kind of busyness that I'm doing in my power, that I haven't even given over to God. And so she challenged me to start every day by saying, okay, God, what are you and I doing today? And that was terrifying. That was in January. I'm getting better at it. But just realizing that, again, going back to, is somebody else determining my busyness? Like in my job, I oftentimes let other people determine it. And secondly, I often would use my busyness to hide from things, hide from the fact that I didn't know something, or hide from the fact that I was single and I felt embarrassed, hide from, fill in the blank. What would people hide from? An image? What would people think if I left the office at 5 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock? That's the background to this crazy busyness.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing. That's so personal. And it sounds like it's something that's really relevant, given that you had that conversation and started that in January. I guess that we're all at different places in the continuum of this term. As the conversation unfolds, we'll see where we each are. But I'm really glad. So another thing, I think I mentioned this in the video. So is business a positive or a negative word? And you spoke a bit to that. I'd like to get some thoughts from others on the platform. Is business a positive or a negative word? I really like, Dr. Diane, your insight on who determines my business. So it almost sounds like, is my business self-imposed, or is it being imposed on me? Do I determine the rhythm, or is it something external? I found that quite insightful. Any other thoughts about the word business? How do we relate to the term business? Is it a positive word? Is it a negative word? Is it both? Just some open thoughts.
Yeah, Dr. Diane, thank you for the very broad perspective and paintbrush that you used to describe this. Questions like this take me back to page 1 and 2 of the Bible. So business is work, and I think is relative in terms of the time and the energy I spend doing the work. So in the beginning, God gave Adam some work to do. He said, walk the garden. But he also told him to not eat from, gave him one prohibition and say, eat from everywhere. So even though he was walking the garden, he needed to pay attention to prohibitions and things that are allowed. So I think from the beginning, God's intention was for man to be busy. How busy, I don't know. Is it crazy busy? I don't know. But I think busyness is not negative, neither is it positive for me. So I stand with Dr. Diane. Thank you.
Wow, great context from the book of Genesis. Great context. I always love the fact that even before the sin, the fall, when they committed sin, God had already kept them busy tending the garden. So from that perspective, there's a lot of positivity in being busy, being active. I know I just saw a comment from my wife. I know my wife is one of those that I know, being busy for her it keeps her positively engaged, doing things that really even enhances, I would say, in a way, her relationship with God, because she's not idle. I mean, that's one person I know who's not idle. Okay, go ahead, Araujo. Is it my brother, my sister? Go ahead.
Good evening once again. Thank you, Dr. Diane. When I think about the word busyness, first it like a negative impact. But taking what Dr. Diane just spoke about, also, it comes to my mind that what determines if it's positive or it's negative is what I'm busy with. What am I busy doing? I think that's also what makes it negative or positive. And I was just thinking that we can be busy, for example, relaxing. The word busy is always attached to work, but it's an activity and relaxing and taking time for me. It's also a way of using my time because it's got to do with how I use my time. So I can be busy having a good time with God. I can be busy resting. So that's something I took from what Dr. Jen said, and in a sense, I just say it depends on what I'm busy doing that makes it positive or negative.
That is beautiful. That is fantastic. I mean, that leads to probably the next question. How do you see our culture today? I'll come back to Uncle Bajo's hands up. How do we see our culture perpetuating the notion of business as a virtue or as something necessary to attain success, as an aspect of success? How do you think this influences even our personal lives and our priority? That's the next question I was going to ask, but I'll let Uncle Bajo go ahead with his thoughts.
I think it's a fantastic topic. For me, it throws up two connotations. One is taken from John 10:10, as Jesus mentioned in the Bible, that I've come that they may have life and life to the fullest. So for me, that suggests that Jesus expects us to be busy. I think the question, like Juju just said, is what are we busy doing? And what value are we delivering with our business? If I'm busy, delivering value into myself, for myself, me, myself, and I, that may be crazy. I may be crazy busy, but it may not be a positive business. But if my business, my being busy, is actually making the lives of others better, or I'm serving God and I'm doing God's will, and I'm improving the community and society, then I think that's a positive business. And again, of course, there's also the other connotation, that the question about work-life balance. And I think these two are related. How much time am I giving to my family and those that are important to me, vis-a-vis, giving my best at work and pursuing promotion, all for my own good. So for me, it's a very interesting topic. Thank you.
Great. And you also brought a topic, work-life balance came up the last time. And Dr. Diane had an interesting perspective. She believes in work-life harmony, right? So that was one of the insights I took away from the last session. That stuck with me. Luis from Mozambique, please go ahead.
So I would like to add something about what are we talking about. First, I would like to congratulate the topic because it's a very interesting topic for me, for us. On my perspective, when I talk about being busy or business, I always look at the sense of value added to. Which value must add to what I'm doing, what makes me be busy always. As many participating, trying to say something, they say sometimes we are running to just take care of the family, and the other people saying that now we're investing on what's very important, even being member of the church, spiritual saying, other people being all more professional. What I say is that once we become busy, we must know what's the value added to this business. Because if there is no value added for that, there is no sense of that. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Luis. So if I connect your comment, value add, there was a comment about even relaxing being a form of business. So if I'm relaxing and I'm getting some good rest, I'm spending my energy in that, and I'm getting some value out of it, it's a good thing. So interesting perspectives are coming in here. I'd like to ask Dr. Diane, was there a time or times in history when life was not crazy busy and or has it always been like this?
I think people have always been able to find a way to stay busy. I mean, it's funny because I remember a while ago, when I was doing my master's, the big popular book was the 4 hour work week or something crazy like that. And how everybody was thinking technology is going to make life so much easier. And we're only going to have to work a few hours a day and only a few days a week. And then we'll have so much time to relax. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, we're constantly bombarded, whether it's social media, emails, pings, a ping from WhatsApp, a ping, And so, yeah, I think that it's us, it's people. It's not everything that we have around us. It's who we are as individuals. And I think it's so powerful when we talk about, is our busyness adding value? Because I think that that's really the key. It's our heart. Why are we busy? What and who are we doing this for? And it's not always clear cut. I mean, one of the stories that I really love is, Jesus would go off early in the morning to pray. And there was one day the disciples were running after him going like, where are you? We need you. People need to get healed. Like even the disciples had a challenge trying to figure out like, I don't know, maybe people had come to them and asked them and they were unable to heal. And then they got nervous or embarrassed and are like, where's Jesus? So I think it's just a constant, it doesn't matter if you lived in today's world. I don't think it matters where you live, what continent or city you live in, whether you live today or 200 or 400 years ago. I think that our human nature propels us to seek things. The question is why we seek those things, why we seek to do those things.
Great comment. My wife just shared on the platform, business could be positive or negative. It depends on what the motive or the outcome. So that connects with what you just said, Dr. Dan. Am I busy so people won't say or think I'm lazy? Am I being busy to add value, or is there balance in the outcome of my business? Great comments are coming in there.
Yeah.
What defines busy?
If I could just read the one from Dele, which is what defines busy? What's the benchmark?
Please go ahead.
I think Eugene Peterson, who's a wonderful Christian author, he wrote something that I've tried to adopt. And he talks about how it's impossible for him to pray when he's busy. And what does he mean by that? He doesn't mean when sometimes he'll go for a prayer walk. And so he's busy walking and that's okay. He says, but if my mind is busy and I'm thinking about 20 things or trying, he goes, you cannot multitask when you pray, and so that's kind of like my standard. If I'm trying to pray and my mind is all over the place, I need to just stop and write down what's bothering me or, do something else so that's my standard for me, when I think about what is busy or when am I being too busy. So I don't know if that helps Dele, but I'd be keen to know from others, how do you know if you're being too busy or busy with the wrong things?
Great question. Great
Maybe
comment.
you have insight, Gilbert. We'll ask you a question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So it's funny because when you were talking, and I know you've quoted examples from Jesus's life, I tend to look at Jesus and I think, wow. I mean, the example you just gave now, he goes praying and they're looking for him. They come looking for him. Everybody's looking for you. And if I think about another example, the story of Lazarus, right? He came 2 days late. This is his great friend, Lazarus. I mean, brother to Mary and Martha. And I mean, they were like his buddies, his family friends. He would go and hang out and spend time with them. And he hears about Lazarus and he comes 2 days later. It almost felt insensitive of Jesus to do that. But the sense I get as I watch Jesus, he had a lot to do. His days were packed. In the scripture you just mentioned, Mark 1:35, the previous night he had been up till late. And then very early the next morning he's out there praying. So he was clearly very busy. But the sense I get from watching Jesus is he wouldn't allow people dictate his timetable. He wouldn't be rushed. He would rather go ask God, like what you're practicing now, what the sister recommended. He would rather go early in the morning and ask God, what are we doing today? And that's basically what his early morning prayer times were about. And so I think it's really difficult it's not a right or wrong or a black or white kind of thing, but I think it really comes back to discipleship in terms of learning from Jesus, how he did it. That's what I've been trying to learn lately. Having read books like The Relentless, what was that again? The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John McComber, where he just, this is a guy who was a pastor of a big mega church, busy, went through kind of like a breakdown and had to learn how to slow down, how to slow down for the purpose of his walk with God. And so for me personally, I'm also making some steps in that journey. And what I realize is that it really has to do with me learning from Jesus, learning from others, how they did it in their walk with God, how they prioritize things in their life. I want to just quickly mention that the invention of the clock, I think it was in 13 something. Interestingly, the first clock that was in Cologne, Germany, I found that was no coincidence, having lived in Germany and understanding how the Germans go about time. But the invention of the clock, kind of took the rhythms of life that God had established. God had established that our time was regulated by the seasons. So during summer, there were longer days and shorter nights, and then winter you had longer nights, and then we had like our body actually has a clock. So there was a natural rhythm to life. But from the time the clock got invented, human beings hijacked time and started determining how time is utilized. I just thought I should drop that point.
Yep. Well, and it's true. And the other thing that you and I chatted about is the whole idea of modern technology. Let's just think of our phones, for example. And they've done surveys, and allegedly your average iPhone user touches the phone 2,617 times a day. There's only 24 hours in a day, so that's more than 100 times an hour that we're touching our phone, which there's only 60 minutes in an hour, so but what they've seen, at least in the United States, is that our attention span as individuals is all of 8 seconds. And one of the funny things is that goldfish, they have attention spans of 9 seconds. So that means today a goldfish actually has a longer attention span than you and me. Like, wow. That's kind of sad.
Wow. That's a lot of food for thought right there.
Yeah. So,
any responses to those thoughts? Wow. I see Bajo with a smile. You want to say something?
No, I was just laughing at the goldfish analogy. That's really funny to me. Thank you.
So the goldfish has a longer memory span than most of us, and that's what, yeah. So, yeah. And that was a question I was trying to ask: is how is business perceived is it a virtue? Is it necessary for success? Dr. Diane, I think in our conversation you mentioned the 7 habits of successful people. That's Steve Cole. You want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, there's, we turn to social media, we turn to books, and they are things that I think can pressure us to measure ourselves against. So it's not that the 7 habits of highly effective people, it's wrong or it's sin, but we always want to be able to look at it with some common sense. We don't want it to become a checklist. You know, I think about Jesus and I think about his days, and we know he was dedicated to prayer. And I feel like that was the time that enabled him to make sure that he stayed in step with the Spirit and not with what others wanted him to do. And how that provided a bit of a cadence or a rhythm, a daily rhythm. Because there are so many things throughout the day that pool on our attention, and those aren't necessarily bad things. It's a question of priorities, or what should you set. And so, you know, there's a number of books. I've actually studied out busyness. I was just looking, I had written down some of the ones that I had used. And they're all Christian books. You mentioned The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and I'll put these in the chat. There's another great book that I read called Crazy Busy. It's a very short book. Leading with a Limp is a book that I read. I was able to do my PhD at a Christian university. And so we read a lot of Christian textbooks. And one of them was about leading with a limp. Another one was called Addiction and Grace. And what is it that we're addicted to? So there's some good books out there that can teach us or help us see how our lives compare. But I think bottom line, Jesus every morning got up and spent time with God. And I think that having that cadence every day is what kept him grounded and focused on his mission and not scope creep. But I'd be curious to hear what others think.
Exactly. Please go ahead, share your thoughts. It's a conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Diane, and all who has contributed. I keep going back to page 1 and 2. I mean, the way the whole conceptualizer has conceptualized this, he himself was busy for 6 days and rested from creation on the 7th day. So we can extract from that how God wants us to be busy with his work, our work, and then he wants us to rest. There is a harmony, using Dr. Diane's word. There needs to be a harmony between that busyness for what we want and what God has called us to do, and also resting to refresh, to rejuvenate, and to be involved in other disciplines, I think. Yeah, thanks.
That is powerful. Thanks for bringing that. The thought about rest. Rest is such a big one. That's a big theme. Interestingly, in one of the researches, they found that pastors tend to be as busy as doctors and lawyers. They tend to be super busy. So even within the Christian circles, there's a lot to learn about the importance of rest. So thanks for mentioning that. And I see Dr. Diana's posted those references, some great books. Yeah, there's some great books and resources that can help us in our journey to find that harmony in terms of how we manage busyness and the need to balance it off with rest. For me personally, even as I've read some of these books, especially John McCormack's book, it's beginning to really change my mindset about taking time out to rest. One can get so involved in the culture of busyness, like my wife was saying. Is it because you don't want to be perceived as being lazy? I know when I moved to Lagos some 14 years ago, there was this mindset that in Lagos, even if you don't have any job, you don't have anything doing, when you get up in the morning, you just have to go out. Go out. You gotta go somewhere. You know, neighbors will not allow you sitting around. Like, are you okay? Is everything okay? I mean, you gotta be on the go. Go get something, done with your life. But I'm beginning to learn the value of rest. Because when you get so addicted with busyness, it becomes even difficult just to give yourself a break and to rest and to allow your body to rejuvenate, just like Uncle Indu was saying. And some other comments here in the group. Wow, that's a good one. Thank you. Let me continue with some other questions. So what steps can individuals take to break free from a cycle of business, a negative cycle of business? Uncle Indu mentioned the importance of rest. learning from God, the great conceptualizer, right from the book of Genesis. So what are some steps that one can take to break from a cycle of busyness? I know, Dr. Dan, when we were having that conversation initially, you were telling me that you could have been a 5-time Olympics champion when it comes to busyness. Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I used to be very proud about the fact that, you know, I could be spinning 37 plates at the same time and be doing it all really well. And so I would always joke that if there was an Olympic sport called busyness, I'd be the 5-time returning gold medalist. And yeah, and I look back at that and it was like I got my identity from my busyness. I didn't get my identity from being God's daughter. And as I mentioned, a lot of that was just to hide my insecurities because I grew up with parents that sacrificed so that we could go to a Christian school, so that we could get a good education. You know, I went to university, did an MBA, did a PhD, you know, so it was just like from a young age, it was like, you're going to perform, you're good. So it was all about do. And so I would get my confidence from that busyness. But, you know, one of the things that I kept asking myself in the back of my mind, but I was too scared to say out loud was, what if I'm climbing up a corporate ladder, I get to the top and it's the wrong ladder? And so that's one of the reasons why I really appreciated my PhD. And that's kind of where I started on this journey of figuring out who am I and what do I want? Where am I getting my identity from? Because I felt like I was getting too much of it from my job. And so for me, it was a question of not just setting my priorities, but also Peter Drucker is a great management guru, and he talks about setting your posteriorities. Now, your posterior is your behind, your bottom. Okay. So he would always tell people, he's like, you don't need to just know your priorities. You need to know what you're not going to do. And for me, it was a bit easier to say, okay, what don't I need to do? And I'll be honest, even as a disciple, I would throw myself into spiritual related work. And that wasn't always good either. I was like, okay, when I traveled a lot for my job. So every city I go to, I'm going to meet with disciples and I'm going to do this and I'm going to teach a class or I'm going to spend time with the sisters. But even that, it was just do. And it wasn't done from a bad heart, but I don't know that that was always the best use of my time. And so, yeah, so for me, it's what are my priorities, but also what are the things that I'm going to say no to? And I just had to start asking myself different questions. So instead of what am I going to accomplish today, it's like, how am I going to prioritize rest? How am I going to get everything done? I had to replace, who can I ask for help? You know, instead of saying, how many things can I say yes to? I had to start asking myself, well, what should I say no to?
That's right.
And instead of, you know, what demands my attention, it's like, well, what matters most to God that I do? So yeah, those were just, I had to shift the questions that I was asking myself.
That's powerful. Thanks for sharing that. It's so practical, so practical. In fact, as we were talking, another question in the box. It is often said that the world is run by tired men. I remember that in French. Le monde est dirigé par les hommes épuisés, les hommes fatigués. How does this compare to the need for us to balance things as the corporate world continues to push the boundary of work and more work? So it almost sounds here, if I have to paraphrase this question from my wife, is how do you go about setting those boundaries? And I think you did address some of that in the comments you made. Recently, I learned 3 permissions. There's a course I did last year, and one of the courses was around was taught by a brother. He has a doctorate and he does a lot of work in psychology and stuff. And he wrote a great book. And it taught 3 permissions that I've been learning. I've been practicing them. The first permission is the permission to discern things for yourself. The second one is the permission to be yourself. And then the third that has to do with this topic is the permission to say no and to set boundaries. And so I like what you said about what are the things that can get done, or how many things can I say yes to. So if one has been really involved in this culture of defining one's identity from one's business, then there's some unlearning to do. And I really appreciated the example. I think I'm also in that school now where I'm learning how to say no. I'm learning how to say no in a nice way, but to have some degree of firmness. I know for me, with my travels, I remember being in the US last year. I was away for a month, away from my family. We wanted to make the trip together. We couldn't get a visa for our son, so my wife stayed back with him. And for that reason, I remember having to come back home, and somebody reached out to me to say, look, you know what, we would like you to be a guest speaker at this occasion. And it was all wonderful, all looked really great. But when I checked my calendar, I realized it was going to be a couple of days after my return from it. And as appealing as it was, and as tempting as it was to say yes to that, I had to nicely explain to him that, look, you know what, I've been away from my family, and when I come back, this speaking engagement will be like 3-4 days after my return. And I've been away from a young son, he's just 5. He turned 5, I was not even around to celebrate with him. So please, I will need to spend time with him. And so I'm increasingly having situations like that where I just have to set the right priorities and nicely learn to say no. I see Ugochukwu's hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for the class. So far, I've learned a lot, but the question you asked, I will just relate it to the concept of Christ, Jesus in the Bible. Now, looking at at the age 12, when Jesus Christ was in the temple and his parents were looking for him, they came to him and it was like, where have you been? We've been looking for you. And they said, don't you know I will be about my father's business? So for me, it's just like Christ, he prioritized his purpose in life, which is fulfilling Christ's will for us as disciples and for himself too. That is one. I feel that for us to effectively manage our time, we have to also prioritize our purpose. One is to identify and then prioritize our purpose. Then second concept about Christ is when I think Martha came to her to say, Lazarus was dead. I mean, Jesus Christ had to stay more days before he even attended to that invitation for him to come over. You know, in our life generally, sometimes we just jump at things without having to wait to critically seek the right time and opportunity for us to do certain things. And with that, we can be pressed. With that, we can be pressured. So what I'm trying to say in essence is, for us, not everything we'll jump into. We just have to step back and look, perceive it, and say, okay, is there a right time for me to actually go into this or do this, so that we can not be so having things calling our attention and demanding so much from us to an extent where we become very pressured and feel very bad about what we are doing. So thank you. That's what I just want to add.
Great thoughts. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. And yeah, Jesus said that, you know, I should be going after my Father's business, right? My Father's affairs. That's a great scriptural reference right there. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think Dr. Diane also mentioned something that really stuck to me is how can I get help? You know, so that's one of the things I'm also learning more and more recently is I'll find myself in situations where there's a lot to do and I'm really struggling to decide what to say no to. For me, even just like this weekend, today's session, there's a session coming up tomorrow, one coming on Sunday. And I just found that all of them are important. That what I realized was that being able to get help, like where I have a session tomorrow where I'm not going to be the speaker. I got other people who are going to be speaking, and I'll be there to listen and learn. So it's taken off some pressure from me. There's a session I'm going to be doing on Sunday. The pressure I was going to be facing was going to be the pressure of translating the content from English to French, because I'll be teaching a class to leaders of churches in Central Africa. But I reached out to a teacher colleague in Abidjan who has already taught the same course in French. So I have content, I have great material already translated, and I can just look through and use some relevant information. I have even more than enough. So collaboration helps take away some of the pressure. So I really enjoyed Dr. Dan. Thanks for sharing the insight about where can I get help. That also really helps in managing our time and the pressure that the brother just talked about. Before I get Uncle Ndu to share, Emmanuel just shared here a painful stat about the average human attention span. I relate, but I want to break that. As a God imager, I can surely do better than a goldfish. I like that. That's a really affirming statement right there. Excellent. Go ahead, Uncle Ndu.
Yes, Dr. Diane, I just wanted to thank you. I was drawn into what you said when you said you're redefining the way the questions you're asking. Instead of saying, how can I get everything accomplished? You're saying, how can I get help? That is a break turner for me, because I come from a background where I'm trained not to show that I need help, to show that, if you get it done, you're a macho guy, just get it done, don't ask for help. Yes. And that's a disadvantage in a community setting. So thanks for sharing that, because I've been learning on how to first say, is there anyone here, anyone around who has done this before, who can help? So it takes away pressure. It makes it much easier. And I mean, Gilbert is someone that I lean on most of the time. And some people here, I lean on them to say, oh, have you done this before? Or do you know someone who has done this before? I'm learning to not feel shame asking for help. So thank you for that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. This is real. This topic is so real. The more we share. In fact, what you just mentioned, I had a question around community support, and you've just spoken to that. How important is it for individuals to have a supportive community? Collaboration, being part of that. Also a community that encourages rest, healthy boundaries, where you're not judged when you need to take that time off, where you're actually encouraged to do so. How can churches and other communities foster environments that prioritize rest and renewal? That was just one question I also had that I wanted to throw out there. Any thoughts, Dr. Diane?
Yeah, again, who are we relying on, ourselves or God? And I think that in the past, I know for myself, I know that my works don't save me, but if you looked at my life, you wouldn't believe that, or you wouldn't see that. If you looked at my life, you would see a woman who thinks that her works do save her. And so for me, it came back to being, okay, will I really trust God in this? And opening up and asking a few sisters. I mean, I had a sister she was looking for a place to live in Amsterdam. She stayed with me for a couple months, and it was amazing. She'd be like, Dan, do you know what your favorite word is? I was like, my favorite word? I said, no. She goes, it's absolutely. Every time somebody asks you something, you're like, absolutely. Dan, can the campus have a karaoke night at your place? Absolutely. Can we do midweek at your place? Absolutely. Can we do a baby shower? Absolutely. Can you do the study? It was like, I was like, really? And so I asked two other sisters who just laughed and said yes. So I gave all three of them permission to tap me on the shoulder and be like, they hear me say that. And so now it's kind of become a joke around church. It's like whenever I say absolutely, people are like, Deanne, what did you just say? But it became such an entrenched habit. And again, it's not that I don't want to serve, but was I saying it because I thought I was expected to say that, or because, oh, as a good Christian girl, you're going to do everything people ask? And so, you know, just that little thing. Am I living my life like I'm really trusting that God is going to take care of everything? Or are people going to look at me and think that, oh, her salvation is by her works, not by God?
That's very profound. That's very profound. So we can confess and profess that our salvation is by grace, but how does it look like in the way we live our lives? It should be reflected in how we live our lives, being able to take time off to rest, being able to give ourselves the permission to say no, to set boundaries. That's what I get from what you just shared. So let's talk about the future outlook as we try to wrap up today's conversation. I think we've heard a lot of practical tips being shared about how to combat or balance or harmonize the whole topic of business, cultivating a sense of peace and purpose. I like what our brother talked about. When you have a purpose and you have a sense of purpose, I've realized for me, last year, for example, I did something very difficult. I was a vice chairman on a board of something that I really believe in, but I realized the amount of time and energy I was spending in meetings and so on were really taking a toll on me. So I feel like I contributed greatly for the almost 3 years I was playing that role, but I had to bow out of that role and just narrow myself a bit more on the areas I believe I'm called to. And so I really like that comment on understanding our purpose. It kind of helps narrow things down. But as we wrap up here, looking ahead, how do you envision the conversation around business evolving in our society, even within the church? What role do you think we as Christians can play in shaping a healthy approach to work, rest, relationships, to the topic of business? Any future outlook?
I'm going to answer that, and at the same time answer Osas's question about how do you effectively leave work at work, considering remote work and technology, especially in creative fields where you drive inspiration. So it really is coming down to a decision. So I, like I said, I was not very wise. I was burning the candle at every end, spinning 37 plates and being an Olympic gold medalist in busyness. Until I blacked out 3 times in a row. The third time I blacked out for 24 hours. It's the border of Angola and Namibia. And that finally woke me up and got my attention. One of the things that I had to change was, well, there were 2 main things I had to change. The first was I worked for a Middle Eastern company. Their weekend was Friday, Saturday. So they worked on Sunday and they expected me to be on conference calls on a Sunday. And I always said yes. So I was busy with church and then I'd run and have conference calls or have conference calls before church and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait a second. I work on Fridays. And when I have a call on a Friday, they don't come because it's their weekend. Why am I submitting to this double standard? So I started saying no. Huge fear factor. But I'm like, God, you know what? You're greater than this. So whatever. And everybody in Dubai and Kuwait was shocked. But you know what? Thank you, Lord. Nobody's ever died from me missing a phone call on a Sunday. Okay. So that was one thing. I needed to set those boundaries for my schedule. I also set boundaries for when I do calls. I leave the office, no call after 6 p.m. That's it. I don't do it. But the other thing I needed to do was this thing called a phone. I turn off every single notification. My phone never beeps, and everybody in my office knows, do not have your phone beep because Deanne will give you a dirty look. So I don't need, and I tell people, I don't need to know how popular you are. I don't need to know how many SMSs, WhatsApps, emails you get. But what that also has done, it's really calmed me down because now I decide when I'm going to pick this up. And when it's on my phone, on my desk, it's down like this. So I don't even see it. The final thing that I did is at 20:45, so 8:45 p.m., my phone goes on sleep mode. That means even if somebody calls me, I don't even hear it. I told my family, by the way, this is what I'm doing. So, they're fine with it. But it's making those little decisions about, and it's the same thing with disciples. I'll have disciples, message me, I didn't hear back from you. And I tell them 8:45 p.m., my phone goes on silent with all due respect. I mean, if there's an emergency, okay, my sister-in-law had surgery last week, then I kept looking at my phone because I wanted to know the results, but that's once in a blue moon. And so it's making those little decisions, but also communicating them to people.
Yeah.
So, and you can gain their respect when you respect their boundaries as well. Maybe somebody decides, you know what, on a Sunday afternoon, it is my family time. I'm not available for a Bible study or a leaders meeting. Hey, amen. I need to respect you for that. And so be open about it. Their sisters and I, we don't get together during the week because they work crazy hours. One is in advertising, one is in retail. And so we get together for our prayer times, our discipling times, our Bible studies, whatever, on Sundays, because we're all single. None of us are from the Netherlands. I mean, I'm the closest. I've got cousins, but that's it. So for the rest, we don't have family here. And so that's when we can spend a lot of time together. Now, there were people at church here in Amsterdam that were like, I'm sorry, you're supposed to get together on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night. And so I would just explain to them, you know what? We work. Evelyn works till 9:30 at night. Samantha works till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Sundays, we can get together and talk for an hour or 3 hours, whatever we need. And people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. So yeah, so don't be afraid to set those boundaries for yourself. Don't be afraid to proactively share with people and to get their input. If people think you're extreme, say, okay, tell me what you're thinking and why. But it's really up to us to make those decisions. And the number one motivator should be what's going to help us be more like Jesus and bring more glory to Jesus.
Fantastic. That's so practical. I really love the one on the phone. That's very relevant. Very relevant. So the conversation about business, it sounds to me like it's a journey that we each have to decide to walk depending on our situation, our context. But I found a lot of practical tips from the things you've shared. Osas is definitely grateful for your response, I can see. I'm trying to just get somebody to help wrap up by giving us some closing thoughts. Uncle Lynn, do you want to do that?
Not as in closing thoughts. I just wanted to thank Dr. Diane for what she shared. I'm sure you were able to create those boundaries because also your value creation at work was evident to everybody. Somebody who is lazy and non-diligent could not do that, So I'm very grateful you're sharing this because I have similar experiences when I worked at a very high level in Nigeria. But this is good, Gilbert. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that's a great insight you just brought in there. So it brings some level of balance. I'll choose the word balance right there. So because you're creating a lot of value, it kind of like gives you even room to be able to draw some boundaries, and people would tend to respect you some more. So there are two extremes to the conversation of business. You don't want to be crazy busy, and you don't want to be crazy lazy. You want to be able to, produce some value. My closing thoughts, I was just trying to see if there anybody else with some closing thoughts. I see in this conversation today a lot of thanks, Uncle Ndu, for your thoughts from Genesis in terms of just reminding us of God's initial, I use the word conceptualizer, he conceived life and how he imagined in himself rested. And so I'm taking that away as as a very, as a great, I think it was Della who asked, how do we determine, how do we set boundaries, how do we even benchmark? And so God himself is taking time out to rest. And so it is in God's value system that we don't get crazy busy to the point of burning out or passing out, like Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan, thanks for sharing what happened to you. You mentioned at one of the borders, because I was planning to ask you, you mentioned in our earlier conversation that God woke you up. And I had in mind to ask you, how did God wake you up? I think you just gave some insight into that. We don't want to get to the point where we burn out, but at the same time, we have the example of God in Genesis, we have the example of Jesus, and we have real life examples of people like Dr. Diane sharing her experiences. We can all learn from each other on the journey of striking, of learning to harmonize our lives. I'm taking away the ones you talked about, phone notifications. I'm taking that as a big one. I think I'm going to have to work on my phone and take away those notifications. I think that will bring some more sanity to my life. So I want to thank you for that. Some comments here. Just want to say thank you, Dr. Diane and Gilbert, for the great topic and insight. I realize I have a lot to learn and repent. Okay, amen. Glad to look back and learn and become wiser. Thanks for all those great comments. Oh, my big sister Judith from Zimbabwe, thank you. I learned that we need to rest. We need rest. We need to select what to do and what not to do. Also need to have boundaries. Great takeaways right there. You're going to set boundaries and communicate them as well. That was really important, not to create some kind of misunderstanding. So I believe we've had a really productive conversation. I'm afraid we might revisit this topic. We might do a part 2 of it. Let's see what the Spirit reserves for our next session in May. If not in May, most likely early June. I'll check with Dr. Diana and see our timetable. Thank you so much. God bless. Can I just ask for somebody to close out with a word of prayer, please?
Yes, can I do that?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Dear Father, thank you so much for this meeting online. Thank you for technology and the benefits it has for us, that we can hear each other's voice, even see each other's faces. Thank you for making the world the way you did, for giving us work to do. Thank you for everything you've blessed us with. God, help us to, create the balance between being busy and just adding value both to our lives and the lives of other people. Thank you for Dr. Diane. Thank you for Gilbert and this Fireside chat. I pray it will grow and grow a lot more, and more people can come and learn and change their lives. We glorify you. We honor you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.